Wendy, let's start with one that, this one plays with your head a little bit, I suspect, and it's in the issue around New South Wales conversion laws because over the weekend, the New South Wales opposition leader, so the Labor leader, Chris Minns, announced on the weekend that he would ban conversion practices if elected. Give us your insights in here as to what's happened.
It's really interesting you say this plays with your head because I think that's exactly right. Because right from the outset, I would have to say ACL, and I know that you as well, we would be opposed to all coercive conversion practices. So if people think to themselves conversion practices, we're thinking of, shock therapy or brainwashing treatment, that sort of thing, that is already unlawful. And of course we would be opposed to that. But there is no evidence of this happening in New South Wales or indeed around Australia. But what our concern is, I guess, is that the real objective is to do a Victorian-style election, policy, which is in Victoria, they outlaw even consensual counselling and prayer. They even outlaw in Victoria, so it's a criminal offence for a parent to have a conversation with a child, trying to stop them from wanting to transition to a transgender identity. So this is what our concern is. But when people say, conversion therapy, what comes to mind is something horrendous that does not happen and is already unlawful. So, we need to, that's why I think it plays with people's head a bit.
So all of the same issues are in play, and to be fair, this is on both sides, isn't it? This is the Liberal Party in New South Wales as well as the Labor Party in New South Wales. All seem to be supporting these sorts of bans that would outlaw churches, even doing, as you say, consensual counselling. Even people in a prayer line, as I understand it, could be, in the firing line here. But those parental conversations around a dinner table, or things that are going pear-shaped in a family, and parents can't even have the right to talk to their own kids. This is the sort of thing that that you're talking about here. That we need to get our head around and understand, how to make sense of what's being said.
Correct. So with the Labor Party, Chris Minns came out with this is what we'll do if we're elected, and very quickly Perrottet jumped on board and said, oh yes, we'll introduce these laws as well. So what we really need to do is to make sure that we're part of that conversation, because we need to make sure that they understand if they try and bring in a Victorian-style legislation, which is also what is happening in Tasmania, we will push back. And when I'm saying we, I'm not just meaning ACL. We need to be, as a people of God, pushing back on this, because when you look at the Victorian law, I need to make this really clear. The Victorian law does not simply make electroshock or brainwashing sort of treatments unlawful. Its wording is broad enough to ban, it bans counselling from a pastor or a Christian counsellor, or, as you say, even a parent advising someone, even that sex outside of man-woman marriage is sinful. They wouldn't even be able to say that. It would be unlawful to talk to anybody in terms of resisting any sort of temptation that we would see was outside God's parameters. But it also, the Victorian legislation explicitly says that it applies to carrying out a religious practice, including prayer. So this is an incredibly concerning development in New South Wales. What we're talking about is people who are asking for prayer and not being able to get it because of the criminal penalty attached there.
And when people want help, oftentimes they'll turn to their local church, or they'll be referred to someone within a church who has their head around these sorts of issues. But criminalising the church around these issues is very challenging. And as you say, there's already some significant things in play in Victoria, and it is already on the agenda for both sides, no matter what the outcome of the New South Wales state election. So it doesn't leave a whole lot of hope there for there being some level of freedom of religion, freedom of thought, freedom of speech in New South Wales to be able to continue, Wendy. And let me just to throw this in here. For your impression, Wendy Francis, it seems to be that Christians who are aware that something needs to be done, someone needs to speak up, our response is usually pretty poor, isn't it?
Well, I think people are concerned about their own well-being and their own safety, but this is really important because what we're talking about is children who are confused about their gender, and this is a very real occurrence. This is something that is growing because of the sort of stuff we've got in our curriculum, and I think even what's happening in Tasmania with drag queens and stuff. This is the confusion over gender is something that is on the increase. And we are actually sacrificing our children if we are not prepared to speak up about this, because children need that sort of watchful waiting approach that is global best practice. That is certainly medical practitioners right across the board would say global best practice is a watchful waiting, not immediately putting your children onto some sort of hormone blockers when they're only 11 years old, followed by often other hormones that would help them to transition, and even surgical assistance to help them transition, which we know will never, ever end in a good result, because you cannot biologically change from one gender to another. It's actually impossible.
And Wendy, just to deepen this some more too, because some people might be thinking, oh, this is just another conspiracy theory. People being outspoken saying that our freedoms are under threat, and really is there a true threat that's there? Because, hey, aren't these laws in force in Victoria, and, people aren't being imprisoned? But the thought here that, you could say, is this some sort of conspiracy theory? As you pointed out, there are no evidence for any of those conversion practices, the shock treatment and such things happening anywhere. So you only have to boil it down and you recognise that this is aimed at Christians. It's aimed at the church. That is a concern, isn't it?
It's a huge concern, because if a church or even any practitioner was using the sort of electroshock or brainwashing treatments, then I actually have to say that churches were never the main culprit for this. We go back and look at counselling sessions that did use this. Of course, that's not right, and that is not happening. If it was happening, then we could go to the police about that. It is unlawful. Those treatments are unlawful already. So we've got to say, okay, what is the main target here? And you have to look at faith-based groups, because the legislation explicitly says that it applies to carrying out a religious practice, including but not limited to a prayer-based practice. So prayer is actually in the firing gun here. And if we can't pray for somebody, then we have no religious freedom at all in our nation.
And it is hurting the people it's designed to protect, because if you can't seek help, if you can't go to your doctor and expect your doctor will tell you the truth, you're the one who's being hurt. It doesn't necessarily affect or hurt Christians if we are, saying, no, we can't talk to you about that. The people who are seeking the help are the ones who are being hurt, aren't they?
It's the children. It always comes back to the children for me, Neil, and I know that adults are also being hurt. But young children are never, you can't say that a child can't be easily affected by the sort of curriculum that they're seeing. We can't say that a child's not going to be confused during puberty. What child is not confused during puberty? So what they need is somebody to walk alongside them, to be truthful with them, to love them, to see them through to the other side, not to immediately say, well, the only thing we can do here, the only legal avenue for a child who's confused in Victoria is to affirm them in their confusion. That is the only legal pathway. And this is what New South Wales are looking to emulate, and we are just going to push back as much as we possibly can, because this is just too important.
Wendy, there's a state election coming up in New South Wales, and you've got both sides, the Labor Party and the Liberal Party, both saying they'll want to ban conversion practices, and as you say, those things are already outlawed. the way you think of those dreadful physical effect practices, but the target is the Christian church. What's the answer, Wendy Francis? How should we be thinking? Candidates that we vote for? What sort of action can you take? Should you be in touch with your MPs and candidates at this time? This is an important time, isn't it, in the lead up to an election?
It really is. Election is the one time that you can be very sure that the candidates are listening, the government is listening. And so we need people to contact their local MPs. We need people to contact both leaders and say that they do not want parental rights being removed from them to be able to talk to their children who are confused about their gender. We do not want consensual counselling and prayer and parental conversations to be made criminal. This is an incursion into parental rights. It is a complete switch around between church and state. Like we're saying, we want church and state to be separate, and this is the state telling not just the church, but parents how they are to be able to talk to their children. So yes, Neil, we really encourage people. Contact all of your candidates, ask them how they would vote if this sort of legislation was put in. Contact the two leaders of the parties, contact existing MPs, and stay in touch with ACL, because we're doing a number of different campaigns in this sort of area. So stay in touch with us as well. In the lead up to the election, we're wanting to make sure that we do some interviews with people who are really trying to push back on this as well. So I encourage people to stay in touch.